Hey, it's Soul, and this is the World of Warcraft. Back in October, about a month into Legion, I gave a list of 5 things about the expansion that I found to be like an inexcusable disappointment for the majority of players. So we're going to take a quick look at where we're at now with those, and I'm going to give another 5 disappointments to freshen things up. The first point was that Mythic Xavius was undertuned, and this caused a ripple of disappointment among the raiding community that Blizzard is off the mark when it came to tuning. This was for various reasons, among them the tuning of the encounter itself, and artifact ranks, and legendary armor, and so on and so forth. Since then, Blizzard swung the pendulum straight to the other side and brought players an overtune raid with the Trial of Valor and Helya, who was menacing to underprepared raid teams. This was then followed up with a Nighthold and Gul'dan, which overall was accepted as a strong but reasonably entertaining raid to cap the tier. So technically, the easy Mythic Xavius kill is a stain on Blizzard's record, but time marches on with more wins and disappointments to look forward to. Nomi still sucks. Nomi's been updated a bit, with the chance of learning upgraded recipes having gone up. There's the new random food that gives an additional higher chance of also learning a recipe upgrade. In the 725 PTR, there's a sort of rush order similar to the Warlords of Draenor Garrison rush order that speeds up work orders assigned to Nomi, to basically destroy your materials even faster. Nomi still sucks. And I get it, Blizzard, you gotta stay the course with design paradigms, but for all that is good, do not do cooking like this ever again. In the face of all these game systems like artifact power that are meant to give players the sense that their time is always a positive investment, Nomi is not. I said Bacon sucked because it didn't provide a useful benefit at the start of Legion. Cut to now, Bacon does not suck anymore, now that lavish Suramar feasts give 500 to our main stat, unlike the 200 from before. Bacon has always been cool, but WoW Bacon took some time to get its shit together. And Nomi sucks. Reputations didn't mean anything after Exalted in Legion 7.0 up until Legion 7.2. Today, players who earn enough rep with Exalted factions receive a goodie bag of false hope that's worth slightly more than nothing. Even better, after a recent Q&A, the bag might have even better goodies in the near future. So technically, reputations past Exalted don't have a value of 0 any longer. There's a possible amount in one of those many bags, and players can complain about RNG all day, no problem with that. But as for the reputations past Exalted, they have at least some value, and to be frank, I'm glad that this was salvaged with even this obvious design band-aid. On a side note, my favorite reputations are still the Mista Pandaria reputations that offered a neat questline as a capstone to the daily grind. My hopes are that future expansions will adopt a system beyond Exalted that'll reward players with both a conclusion questline and a long-tail system that adds a bit more value to completing world quests. Finally, secondary stats are still a powerful thing to consider, especially when looking at rings and trinkets, but the comical difference secondary stats made early in Legion is no longer there. Aside from a few outliers, I find myself a bit more satisfied with a revisit to secondary stats. Sims and add-ons will still help with the fine-tuning of player optimization, but for most players, item level is king. So let's get on with the good stuff. Here's my new list of 5 Legion disappointments that you probably can't deny, the 7.2 edition. First, we have social tools. We're currently on patch 7.2, and with 7.2.5 around the corner, I think it's safe to say that the delivery of WoW's improved quote-unquote social toolkit has been delivered, and color me disappointed. The social tools mentioned in Legion's initial announcements had me a bit excited. As some of you may know, I'm a big fan of guilds and developing lasting relationships as opposed to the dependence of queues and pugs that seem to permeate today's WoW culture. Toasts are those notifications telling you your existing friends are doing something and would rather not do it with you, otherwise they'd say something first. It's my opinion, but while this feature adds a bit of convenience when you already have a big Battle.net friend list, it can be kind of annoying too. In fact, one of the first big threads I saw on this topic was to ask how to turn it off, followed by a link to an add-on that could disable the notification. I get that our attention spans are short these days, but if we wanted to play with our friends, we'd reach out, at least I think. The other feature comes straight out of Twitter and selfie camera hell. It's a Facebook integration with the formerly Battle.net turned Blizzard application. Now you can opt in and have your Blizzard app notify you that all the Facebook friends you're already stalking that, hey, they've been playing Blizzard games without you too. I don't mean to insult Blizzard's efforts to reinforce relationships, but this is entirely not what I expected by improved social tools. Here I am pushing my agenda again, but I expected something more robust but practical. A more powerful guild finder / player finder tool that helps facilitate the building of long-term groups for PvP or PvE or RP or whatever activity. WoW needs more in-game help for those who don't meander into external communities like the Reddits or the Discords. Artifact power. Actually, in a lot of ways, the premise of artifact power isn't bad. I think it's this unobtainable unicorn of game design, but the idea of an endless system that rewards both the behaviors of both hardcore and casual players with reasonable parity sounds pretty cool. Blizzard has done a good job of pushing the system, learning from mistakes and reiterating on its design to adapt to the player's habits. However, this cycle of learning and reiterating has been really jarring for these players. Before 7.2, players were starting to effectively finish powering up their weapon and were miles ahead of their counterparts who were catching up. The social demands for high item level and achievements to sign up for guild runs or even menial pugs now included the demand for an unreasonable artifact rank that suited the group leader's wants. In response, 7.2 came around, and now we have an artifact power requirement that brings players closer together, but also reads like the promise of mathematical futility. Blizzard decided that, hey, instead of setting a cap that we think is high enough, let's use astronomical numbers instead. And in a way, it worked. With a raid in the horizon, the hard expectations of artifact rank have become more like a reasonable expectation. But for Blizzard to have to make these inelegant changes to artifact weapons with this whole de-leveling process, it's probably on players' minds that in 7.3 this could happen again. It makes me wonder that if in the next expansion will something similar to this progression system exist. I'm not sure, but I don't think WoW's developers nor its players should burden itself with a system like this that's critical to player progression, but ends up being very malleable. Flight. I already talked about this once, so I'll make this one quick. Flight itself is okay. Flight as a mechanic is something I don't entirely agree with, but it doesn't necessarily break the game, thanks to the current Pathfinder achievements that control its release. My disappointment with Flight in 7.2 is that its delivery was just lackluster and with no more fanfare than your standard achievement. There's no awesome quest that grants me the ability or the permission to fly. There's no tongue-in-cheek thing from Khadgar where he's like, "I'm sure you've been wanting to take to the skies, champion. Let me give you that opportunity." And then he pats us on the head and ta-da, we can fly. There's just the sound and the toast of the achievement and, I guess, the relief of completing it. But the worst part about Flight is that there's nothing fresh or new or exciting to do with it. Current world content is easier, yay. The world looks different from the sky, and that's cool. But there's nowhere to go that makes Flight mean something. Flight doesn't unlock anything like, I don't know, a timed quest to deliver supplies to 3 different areas under attack. There could be like random ships in each zone with rare mobs waiting to be killed. There could be Kirin-Tor-based quests based on actual flying and not the gimmicky floating that we've been trying to get around for the past few months. And again folks, this is not actually what I want, I'm just trying to make examples. Because right now there's nothing. There's just doing things faster with our alts, which is nice, and we can pause the game, so to speak. And that's about it. I'm happy to fly, but Legion's world design doesn't seem to care one bit whether I can fly or not. And that feels lazy to me. Next we have 7.2 expectations. Ian Hazukosis sort of squirreled his way out of this one, but effective reasoning doesn't mitigate the disappointment of 7.2's delivery. For the player type who wants to make sure that their favorite character is as in line with the game story as possible, 7.2 has been a race from one hard stop to the next, encountering quests to complete activities that they've already been doing for the past few weeks. The claim of 7.2 being the largest patch ever turned out to be true from the eyes of its developers. The same goes for players who work multiple tunes and specs who could otherwise feel much too overwhelmed actually. Belluar hit the mark on this with a recent video. Thanks to his desire to deliver on class guides, he's churning through 7.2 to develop content and taking every advantage of the numerous system updates that do make the game more alt-friendly. But for the individual player who does not have the 12 characters and every spec being worked on, 7.2 feels like only a fraction of the delivery that was promised. It's not entirely guaranteed yet, but 7.3 expects to be a more unified experience for all players, meaning that development time will go into a delivery that everyone will be able to play through, and there should be fewer instances of content that are reserved for a particular spec and class. But we're nowhere near that yet, so I'm a little bummed. Finally, Titanforging. I've also talked about this before, and I'll bring it up again. Titanforge threatens to compromise the fulfillment of completing content. Not to say that Titanforge's gear totally negates content, but thanks to it existing in every delivery of Legion's reward systems, it's watered down the older paradigm of just working your way up from easier to harder challenges. Over the years, Blizzard's fought against instances where a boss drops a fancy collection of gear that absolutely no one needs or can use. It's not a fun feeling, especially during progression. Blizzard made changes over the years, including the rebalancing of secondary stats, having gear tokens, having gear change dynamically to suit a class's spec type, personal loot. Basically, drops should have a high chance of being something players need because it's an upgrade, again especially when this is a progression thing and this is your first kill. Titanforging threatens the upgrade aspect of it. Players don't need to imagine scenarios but have stories of where loot drops and no one needs anything because the gear earned from outside the raid or the dungeon turned out to be much better thanks to Titanforging. It's made gear from higher forms of content feel a bit less special and take some of the reward out of a hard-earned win. In fact, if we go full hyperbole, so don't take me seriously on this one, the only gear to look forward to in the Tomb of Sargeras might only be tier and trinkets, since those are the only ways gear is unique against everything else outside of it. And this is a big might. Some players are probably saving every nether shard they can get a hold of in the hopes that when the tomb comes out, they can try to get Titanforged gear off relinquished tokens. I don't know if relinquished tokens can Titanforge all the way up to Tomb of Sargeras gear, but well, someone's gonna try it. And that's the list. Share your thoughts, your disagreements and disappointments, but hey, stay breezy.